Thank you, Chairman Graham, and thank you for the chance to have this hearing and to work with you on this important issue. To General Jones, great to see you again. I think our last conversation was in Rwanda, and I'm pleased to see you continuing to pursue the same line of analysis. To Deputy Secretary Blinken, thank you for your decades of service to our nation at the highest levels. And Bono, great to be with you again. And Deputy Commissioner Clements, thank you for your pointed and constructive proposals. One of my own hardest days as a senator was actually with Senator Graham at the Zatria refugee camp in Jordan, seeing both the enormous challenges and the real potential of a refugee camp filled with thousands of Syrians of all ages and backgrounds. And a mentor to me, Tony Lake, who now runs UNICEF, who was a professor of mine in college, has for some time now been arguing, as I believe many of you do, that we need to realign our imagination, reconsider the funding that we provide for humanitarian relief in an emergency situation and the investments we make in development, and recognize that millions of refugees are likely to be outside their countries of origin for a very long period of time. And if we change direction and make investments in a wiser and more targeted way, in partnership with the private sector, in partnership with allies around the world, we can make a significant difference, not just in combating violent extremism, although that is an essential goal of our conversation here today, but also in continuing to build up humankind and to relieve suffering. Bono, I was moved to hear you talk about how the American people are genuinely generous and how our investment in the Marshall Plan really laid the foundation for a Western Europe that's united and stable and free. And your reference to PEPFAR, which largely through the work of senior senators on this committee has made possible relief that's touched the lives of 9 million. I'll also mention the Ebola crisis in West Africa, one where volunteers from around the world joined with the United States in turning around the trajectory of a tragic disease. So I am encouraged and challenged by your terrific op-ed today in the New York Times, by what I've heard from all of you about the Sahel and the Levant, and the ways in which we ought to be working together to craft a more disciplined and thoughtful plan. General, in your written testimony, you have about as good a call to arms as I've heard, and I quote, "We need a global development campaign plan that is as sophisticated, serious, and passionate as any fight in our history, designed and resourced as if the future depends on it, because it does."
That's right.
With the time remaining, I'd be grateful if each of you would simply speak to, so if Congress were to embark on a large-scale plan for foreign assistance that combined all of these elements, real investment in human development alongside humanitarian relief, partnership with our allies in a sustained way that would prevent fragile states from becoming failed states, what would it look like? What conditions would you put on our aid? How would you decide which countries would come in that arc of attention and care and which would be out of it? And how would we tell the American people how long this would last and what our goals are? General, I'd be interested in what role UN peacekeeping plays in this stabilization. And Bono, I, of course, would be interested in what role you think communications and mass culture plays. And Deputy Secretary Blinken, how far you think we already are down the road towards developing and delivering this. And then, of course, Deputy Commissioner, how you see the plight and role of refugees as being at the center of this. So think big and tell us how you would structure it. If you would, please, General.
Well, thank you, Senator. I'll try to be very brief. I just am of the opinion that we are, in order to deal with the challenges and the threats that face us and mankind, really, that we have to approach it a little bit differently. When I was National Security Advisor, we tried to work on a more holistic approach to responding to international threats. Things like cybersecurity, energy security, water security, food security, and of course the conventional definition of security that we leaned on for so many years in the 20th century. In the world that we face today, people have choices, and people know a lot more, and people in the disadvantaged developing countries have access to information that shows them that they don't have to live like this. And the battle is on between extremist ideologies who captivate those minds and said, the reason that you are not doing better is because of these guys. And generally, they point to us. But I'm very optimistic that if we can put together a strategic concept for how each administration deals with these kinds of problems more holistically, to include the private sector and the public sector working together, to advance the idea that America doesn't have to do this alone. What we can do, I think, better than anybody is certainly provide assets and resources, but also provide an organizing principle around which other countries would follow. And the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is a good example, I think, of an international organization of 28 countries that has a fantastic history, but what is its future? And if we can't lead that organization into the 21st century by being more proactive, more preemptive, and more strategic in our thinking, which saves money in the long term, then I think we have a difficult time. So leadership, U.S. leadership, I think, and organizing principles to do these things, to bring international public and private sectors together, to help countries that are on the fringe of going one way or the other in terms of democracy, and whose people know exactly what they're missing and will not hesitate to move by tens of thousands across the Mediterranean from Africa to Europe if they don't see hope for the future. So it's agriculture, it's food, it's water, it's physical security, but it has to be, and it's using organizations like the UN, obviously NGOs. We have to find the table where everybody can sit together and plan this. It's not as expensive as it looks. What's expensive is when you have to go through another Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya without a complete toolkit that says, okay, you defeated, we got security now what? And the now what is what's been missing.
Thank you, General. Mr. Chairman, may other members of the panel respond, or?
Sure.
It's where I'm beyond my time.
Fairly
Deputy
briefly,
Secretary
because I
Blinken,
know other
briefly, if
members
you
want to
might.
ask questions.
What countries are you in, what countries are out?
Sir, first, I'd very much subscribe to what General Jones said. Second, in terms of the countries that are in and the countries that are out, of course, we have to do an assessment of which countries are most at risk, which countries matter to us the most in terms of our own interests and security, and then which are most likely to actually be willing to be partners and to make the changes necessary. Conditions you mentioned. We want to make sure that, in fact, what we're trying to do is really leverage our assistance in different ways. First, leverage it so that the countries in question that receive it actually make the changes that we think are the right ones to make in terms of having sustainable outcomes in all the areas that General Jones just talked about. Second, there are ways to leverage our assistance to get other countries to put in as well. And one of the things we're trying to do, for example, on the refugee crisis is President Obama convened a summit meeting on the margins of the UN General Assembly in September. And one of the goals of that summit meeting is to increase the assistance provided around the world by 30% to the global refugee crisis. So the ante-in to even take part in the summit, to be at the table, is to do more. So we can do that too. Third, I think even as we're thinking about assistance and designing such a program, we also just have to be looking at innovative solutions that are not necessarily driven by money. So, for example, we were talking earlier in the refugee crisis, we need to be doing things like ending this divide between the way we provide humanitarian assistance and the way we do development aid. These things need to be married together, both in the way we budget, in the way we think about problems, and the way we invest in them. Second, we were talking about providing concessional loans to middle-income countries that don't qualify for them, but could use them very effectively, the Jordans and Lebanons of this world. Third, innovative ideas like creating enterprise zones, where if companies invest in those zones and countries invest in those zones, the products that produced get preferential treatment. The people employed in those zones may well be refugees or people who are at risk. So ideas of those kind, I think, are the kind of thinking we need to have to make this work more effectively.
Those are terrific ideas. Bono, you've done an amazing job of leveraging world interest in your leadership to provide relief to millions from HIV/AIDS. How would we do the same in this unique challenge?
You know, I am very humbled to have you ask that question, Senator, and to hear you debating with Senator Graham is one of the great thrills of my life, and some extraordinary place on the far end of the globe, and hear your passion on these subjects. I'm not sure exactly what the Marshall Plan looks like. I liked that three-tiered approach that I thought Tony brought up there. I can speak better about the Sahel, because I know it better than the Levant, which you all do. But I just want to remind people, Africa's really rich. I mean, not just in its resources, but its people. It's extraordinary. And I think it will be an amazing partner for us going forward. I just think for trade, for commerce. Remember, the Marshall Plan did really great for the U.S. Keep thinking about it. I mean, at the time, people were saying, we can't afford it, we can't afford it. But actually, the 50s and the 60s were born out of these, new customers. Can you believe a rock star talking about that? But anyway, it's true. And so I think the biggest problem in the way of that growth, any African will tell you, is reform and fighting corruption, tackling corruption. The Africans are leading this, but you make it easier when you make these packages conditional on that kind of form. That's what they want. Finance ministers say to me all the time on debt cancellation, that, the really key piece of that, Bono, was having our debts cancelled, we had to reform. So I think it's a fantastic thing to arrive in the region, these difficult regions, and you can advise them to reform, or you can say, look, here's what happens when you do. Here's the club. You want to be in this club? Because it's a great club. So I think that's the way I'm seeing it. And just to end, just to say, I think we need an America that is strong, like the General describes, but also an America that's smart. You're strong and smart when you talk like this, and I'm just amazed. I'm actually gobsmacked listening to you all today. I'm sort of having a pinch myself thing, and going, wow, people really get this thing, and they're talking about, asking the American people to go further, and that hurts you politically. But that's real leadership, isn't it? When you do the right thing, and it costs you.
Thank you.
It's really easy to come after these three gentlemen because obviously the concepts are inspirational, but also very concrete. Just a couple of things to add. We talk about this arc of crisis from Southwest Asia, Middle East, through the Horn of Africa, and the Lake Chad Basin. In terms of that being the stretch of where people are being disrooted, that would probably be where to focus in terms of a so-called Marshall Plan redux. Second, don't forget the political. It's tremendously important. We're talking a lot about humanitarian development. We're talking about failed states, governance issues, and so on. Obviously, all that's important. If we can get when we do have those crises solved, it would make a tremendous difference. Syria, Iraq, and Somalia. Those three crises alone are responsible for almost half of the uprooted people we were talking about earlier. So that needs to be part of the overall equation. And then I couldn't agree more in terms of marrying the humanitarian development approaches in a real concrete way. We have a moment now that we haven't had in decades in terms of political attention, including of this subcommittee. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Senator Leahy and Senator Graham for your tremendous leadership at the subcommittee and the entire panel for what you've done to raise our eyes and to challenge us to confront this moment of both opportunity and real difficulty for millions of people around the world. Thank you.